Well, if you've been here at Elizabeth Lee and you've seen the journey over the last 6 years between 2013 and 2019, you've seen that we've been blessed with explosive growth here at Elizabeth Lee. We've gone from average worship attendance of 156 on a given Sunday to 259 presently. And we're really bursting at the seams, which is a great problem to have. But with that growth, we've seen we need additional facility space and upgrades so that this growth can continue. The Planning Committee has looked back historically over the history of the church, and what we've seen is that we have historically bumped up against a limit when we approached 210 to 220 in worship attendance. And then we have fallen back into the 150 realm after we've reached those levels. And we've done that a couple of times over the last 30 years. The Planning Committee knows that in order for the church to sustain the kind of growth we've seen in the last 6 years, we've got to recommend that the church take action, improve our facilities, and increase the space that we have here. One of the real problems we have here is parking. And if we can acquire some adjacent properties in order to get that parking, it's only going to facilitate the growth of the church. So the Planning Committee has come up with a 3-phase, 10-year plan for the growth of the church. And that's what we're proposing and recommending to the church. The 10-year plan involves 3-year increments. Phase 1 would be the first 3 years. And what it would involve is an attempt to acquire some additional property that's adjacent to the church. Recently, the church was approached by the owners of the Jewel properties, which sit on the corner of Chickamauga, and the owner has expressed interest in selling only to us. That's a perfect opportunity, and it's timed strategically because we right now have a better financial situation than we've had in the last 25 years to endeavor to purchase this kind of a property. It's, you're talking about 10 acres plus or minus of property, the house that goes with it, but it would enable us to see the kind of growth that we'd like to have in the future on the rear portion of the church. In addition, we would like to see the renovation of the educational building. We did a church-wide survey. We saw and we heard your responses, and we know that we need to improve our facilities. Restrooms and facility upgrades in that educational building that would benefit the children and the young families that have invested in our church is something that we cannot ignore, and we must recommend to the church that we do take some kind of an action to bring this plan about.
The education building was built 75 years ago, and it is time for some updates. We're looking at updating the bathrooms to suit both traffic from the sanctuary as well as people in the education building, and building a welcome center in the front which will accommodate people as they come in, making it safer for children and designated especially to children. New lighting, new walls, paint, furnishings, new technology, capacity, and once again safety. Always keeping an eye in mind of storage. During that time, while the education building's being renovated, we're going to be in flux, and the Jewel Mansion will be there, and the rooms are good classroom size rooms, and we will be able to have our classes over there, and that will help us in the short term. In the long term, there are so many ways we could grow into the mansion, and so many ministry opportunities that we know about now, and also ones that we haven't even dreamed about yet.
Phase 1, we're renovating the education building. We are looking at a cost of somewhere around $450,000 to $500,000. It could be more due to things that we have to bring up to code, and if we add an elevator is very important. We have a lot of people that can't go upstairs, and we want to utilize that. At Phase 2, we want to renovate or expand our fellowship hall and add a new worship center for the well. We've outgrown our space at the well across the street. We don't know the price of all that right now. We're looking for we're adding an entrance for the parking from Crescent Avenue and Gordon Street. That will enable us to have a better flow, and we will not be crossing Cove Road. Phase 3 would be renovating what is now the well and the office into a youth campus. And again, we don't know those prices. We'll come up with those as time goes on.
One of the questions that I'm sure we all have is, how will we go about raising the money that it will take to implement phase 1 or phase 2 down the road, or phase 3? And assuming that our church votes at our church conference in June, you'll hear more about that later. Assuming we vote to move forward with phase 1, we will also vote upon hiring a capital campaign consultant. The church council has recently approved the hiring of a consultant to help us in leading a capital campaign. Assuming that the church conference votes to indeed move forward with phase 1, that would require us to do a capital campaign. And very quickly after the church conference in June, a capital campaign team will be established. And each one of those members of the team will be responsible for a different aspect of the capital campaign. Someone will be responsible for prayer, someone will be responsible for communications, and on and on. You'll hear more about that as time goes on. You can really expect to hear more about the capital campaign during the fall of 2019 as we lead up to having a commitment Sunday at a date yet to be determined, but probably sometime around November of 2019. After that point, we will share with the congregation how much we have pledged as a church. Upon hearing that news, we will have the opportunity to move forward with the implementation of phase 1. As a United Methodist Church, we are required, before we move forward with any property acquisition or renovation or a project such as that, we have to have a third of any project in cash, we have to have a third in pledges, and we can only take out 1/3 in debt. So those are some numbers to keep in mind as we move forward. The next big milestone for our church is a church conference that will be held on Sunday, June the 23rd. At our most recent church council meeting, our church council voted unanimously to move forward with the master plan, as well as the hiring of a capital campaign consultant to assist in the capital campaign. This will take a church-wide vote to move forward with, and that will happen at a church conference on June the 23rd. That's a Sunday, and you'll be hearing more about that as time goes on. At that church conference, you will be voting. Everyone is invited to that meeting. Every member of our church has a vote, and you will be voting on moving forward or not with phase 1 of the master plan. You will not be voting to approve a contract to purchase the Jewel property. You will not be voting to begin renovations on the education building. You will be voting to move forward with phase 1. Now, once we have, or assuming we have, the church conference's blessing at that vote, then we will move forward with negotiations with the owners of the Jewel property, as well as getting more information about a renovation of the education building. While that is happening, work for the capital campaign will begin in earnest. As the negotiations progress and as the budgets come in for the education building renovation, this fall you can expect that we have a charge conference where we hear more details about negotiations that have taken place with the Jewel property and a budget for a renovation of the education building. At that charge conference, that is when we would be approving a contract for the purchase of the property. Now that would obviously be contingent upon us raising the money that it will take to move forward with phase one. So we'll have the church conference in June. We'll have a charge conference, slightly different, this fall, and then the capital campaign will really begin in earnest later in the fall with a commitment Sunday happening shortly before Thanksgiving, most likely.
If for some reason we're unable to successfully negotiate a purchase agreement for the Jewel properties, there are other adjacent properties to the church that we also are considering attempting to purchase. It's important for us as a church to have room to grow, and we want to use every option available to try to expand our worship without changing the look of Elizabeth Lee. We want to retain the historic quality of our neighborhoods and churches on the front, on the state highway, but we need room behind the church, and we need it for parking, access, and growth.
If you have any questions about the plans or proposals, you can contact any member of the Strategic Planning Committee at our church.